Welcome to this month's session of the Georgia DOE Community for the 6th grade science. This month's topic is on citing evidence. My name is Arcelia Dalton and I am your 6th grade science virtual specialist. So our agenda for today is citing specific textual evidence, quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing, citing evidence to support claims, argumentative claims and informational claims, and using the evidence that the students gather in either an erase, ACE, or ICE writing strategy. So let's talk about citing textual evidence. So what is it? So citing textual evidence requires students to look back into their text for evidence to support an idea, answer a question, or make a claim. Citing evidence requires students to think more deeply about the text or source. And citing evidence is important because it provides the students with validity and strength, proving that they in fact understood what they read. If they don't have much practice with this citing textual evidence, students struggle when we ask them to respond to a prompt. They struggle identifying what's important evidence and what's not, and they usually just start putting information that they think it will sound good, but they don't really, it might not be able to answer the prompt, or whether trying to support the idea that they want to support. So one thing that we always want to emphasize is that this evidence support their claim. So if they're able to do that, then they can understand what they read. And if they cannot understand what they read, understanding what they read can be challenging. So one of the things that I like to do with my students first is providing them with a scaffold, so that way they can go ahead and see how we practice this, citing textual evidence. So I will go ahead and give them something like this, like I will provide them with a claim. And this is also very good to see how much they already know, or just kind of to give them an overview of what we're going to be learning. So I will provide them with a claim. They before they read, they have to kind of do a hypothesis of, from what they have learned in their previously. They can go ahead and see if they know the answer. Then they can go ahead and I will give them a resource, and they will cite evidence from the text. And then they will see, once they read the information, which they do have to understand that, they can see if the evidence that they cited supports or opposes their previous answers. So for example, in this unit on the Earth's water supply, I gave them several claims, but this is just an example. So a few of them, like oceans have always been salty. There's more salt water than fresh water on Earth. Weathering and erosion play a significant role in making Earth's ocean salty. So the first thing is I will tell the students, okay, before you read, decide if you agree or disagree with each of the claims, and then they will highlight or circle the words yes or no in the second column. So as they read, oceans have always been salty, a lot of kids might say yes, and so they will do that. Oh no, some of them will say no, right? There is more salt water than fresh water on Earth. So some kids, they can go ahead and circle what they think the answer might be. Weathering and erosion play a significant role in making Earth's oceans salty. And so they can put whatever they think. Now, I always tell the kids, I said, listen, this is not, if you don't get this right, it's okay. This is just what you think you know. And if you don't know, it's okay. You don't change your answer. So once they do this, they go ahead and I give them the text that I want them to find the information. So I tell them, read the text your teacher has provided, look for specific evidence that helps support or oppose the answer. So it doesn't have to support the answer, it can oppose their answer, okay? So that way they can see if they can really understand what they have learned. And then once they find it, they will type the textual evidence they found in the third column. And since if this is something that they have not learned, like if they have not learned paraphrasing or anything like that, I tell them to quote it and then to tell me what page they got this from. So if I wanted to go back to it, then I know exactly where they got it from. So for example, in the oceans have always been salty, and they've, the kids, some of the kids might have put yes. So when they read the text, they will see that, oh, the rain filled the basins in the Earth's surface and the first oceans were formed. Now they really have to understand here the water cycle, right? So the rain, they know that the rain is fresh water. Okay, so let's think about that. So have they always been salty? All right, so we'll continue, and then we'll see if it supports or opposes. There is more salt water than fresh water on Earth. So they found something like 71% of the Earth's surface is covered with liquid water. Most of it is found in the oceans. And so they quoted that, and then they gave me the page number where they found it. And the same thing for the last claim that I have here. So weather and erosion play a significant role in making Earth's oceans salty. And so they found that as rivers and streams flow towards the ocean, they dissolve minerals from rocks and soil. The rivers carries dissolved minerals to the ocean. And again, they quote that, and then they tell me what page number they found that. So now that they went ahead and found this information, what they're going to do is they're going to circle or highlight if that statement or that claim, that evidence that they just found, not the claim, this is the claim, if that evidence that they found from the text is going to support or oppose their, what they put in here. So for example, on this one, oceans have always been salty. This particular student put yes, but then they found the rain filled the basins in the Earth's surface and the first oceans formed. Well, rain is fresh water, so that means that the basins were being filled with fresh water. So in this case, it will oppose. This evidence opposes what they thought it was. And I always tell the kids again, don't change this before reading, because now you can see what you learned. You learned something new, right? For the next one, they will read that and then say, okay, so there's more salt water than fresh water on Earth. The evidence from the text says that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. So they will put that it supports their claim. It supports what they answer. And for the last one, weather and erosion plays a significant role. So by this time, they have already learned what weather and erosion is and what it does to the rocks as the rivers and stream flow. So in this one, it's saying it dissolves minerals from the rocks. So they put, in this case, it's going to oppose it because they put no. If they have put yes, then they will say, okay, it supports my answer. So I give them something like this at the beginning so they can go ahead and really think about the claim itself. Then they can really think about the evidence and see if they understand. And sometimes the students have a hard time understanding that. But if I give them in little chunks, like one little claim, and then they find something that they wish, they only concentrate in one particular section, and then not a huge claim, prompt where they have to give me several claims, right? So once I have them, and we practice this a lot, one of the things that once they do this, I want them to do something, right? So now they will complete something that is called the I used to think, but now I know section. So hopefully the students learned something new here. And so what they will do is briefly explain information that they have gained from the text that was new or surprising to them. So one example for that will be like, I used to think that the oceans were always salty, but now I know that they started as fresh water and later weather and erosion of the rocks made them salty. And it can be, and I have some kids that say, well, I got everything right. And I said, well, is there something that was surprising to you? And they will say, oh yeah, well, I used to think that this happened, but now I found out that this is surprising. This is new information to me, or I just didn't think that was so much, that it was 75% of the Earth was water or something. I thought it was more like 50 or 90 or something. So they, even though they might know some of the claims already, they might still be surprised on maybe the percentage of the data that they gather. So So this is what I try to do at the beginning of the year. You know, I try to provide them with specific claims so they can concentrate on finding evidence on that specific topic. I really work closely with my language arts teacher to make sure that I support the skill that she's doing at the time. But if they haven't learned how to find, you know, evidence from text at this time, then this is the way I will go ahead and get them started. And so, like I said, we only cite the evidence and we don't paraphrase it unless they have already learned that in class. So as they practice this skill some more, then I could transition them into maybe giving them a little prompt, right? So once they feel more comfortable with the I used to think and now I know statement, then I can offer an open-ended question like this reflection time prompt, right? Here they will use the information they have learned to cite specific evidence to answer the question. So for example, in this one, I said, think and discuss. Water covers over 2/3 of the Earth's surface, yet water shortages are a major problem for many people around the world. Why do they think that's the case? And of course, I did give them, in the original one, I did give them more claims that could answer this question as well. And they will use that evidence and data information that they have learned in class to give me more information about that. So it's not more of I used to think one thing, but now I know this thing, so now they have to really look into that and provide more than one evidence. And that's kind of the way I kind of transition the students into being able to write a little more in using that evidence and claim. So in a previous webinar, I talked about quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing in more detail. So if you would like to look into that and the things that I use and like quick, to do with the students and the skills and everything, and graphic organizers to help you with this, please feel free to look at the last webinar, but I'm just going to go ahead and kind of give you a brief summary of that. So one of the things that I tell the kids is that when you're quoting, you're doing direct quotations. So the quotation marks go around what is said or written. They do not change it. It is word for word. And anytime they're taking information from the source, they need to put where they got it. In like in this example I just gave you, I did give them the specific text information, but they have to give me, so I knew where it was coming from, but they had to give me the page number. So they put quotations around it and they had to put the page number. So kind of get him started into that habit. So when we go into more broad things, then they still have that habit of doing those things, putting the quotation marks on direct quotations and the page or where they found the information. Paraphrasing is hard. So paraphrasing is, I always tell the kids, is what is said or was read, reworded, right? It takes a lot of information and condenses it to what the audience can understand. It can be used with specific information or to summarize big ideas. And sometimes a lot of the kids, what they do is they just go ahead and find, synonyms for what a word is, so to make it easier, but it still kind of sounds the same. And so we try to work with the students, say, no, that's plagiarizing, you can't do that, So it's like, I will have the kids sometimes read it to me if they're still struggling. And then I said, okay, they will close their book and said, okay, tell me what this was about. And then they will tell me, and I was like, that's it, that's how you paraphrase it. And so they'll go ahead and paraphrase it. And they're like, oh, okay. And I feel like if they do that with me one time, then they can use like their, someone, a classmate or somebody, and then they can say, okay, well, this is what I understood. And then that's how they can paraphrase. And then summarizing, is understand what they are reading, separate them in ideas from details, reduce the information given to key ideas or what was the main thing about. One of the things that we try to do is kind of like a one-sentence summary. And then if they can do that, then they're able to understand what they're trying to cite. So I also shared this on the last webinar, but one of the things that when we're doing quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing, I use this graphic organizer that actually the students use in their language arts class. So I try to use this kind of the same thing that our language arts teacher is using, so that way when they see it, they know exactly what to do in my class, and they know how to transfer that skill into the science classroom. So, you know, they will put their research topic, they'll find a credible source, and by this time, usually when I try to give them credible sources, they have already learned what credible sources are. And I will just have to remind them that any website that ends in .org or .edu, it's credible. They're trying to go into Wikipedia, and I was like, nope, Wikipedia is not a credible source, but just mainly if it's .org or .edu, it would. So I try to remind them that, and then they can use their direct quotation. And they'll, you know, if they're using computers, they can just copy and paste. Then they will paraphrase and use their one-sentence summary. So this is important for them to have that information, so that way when they put their claim, they know where it came from, and then we can, you know, if they have something that maybe they misunderstood, I can always go back to that website or whatever it is where they got the direct quotation and their sources. So I can help them paraphrase or do their summary. If my students have not learned yet how to find credible sources, one of the things that this is what our language arts teacher uses, is called the credibility meter. And if you have not used this before, this is information that you can use with your students. And so there's different criteria that students have to go through in order to understand whether if something is a credible source or not, and is whether it's, you know, the accuracy, which is a bibliography or footnotes available for cross-checking. If they're able to cross-check it, then they, you know, and they have that in the bottom, like this is where they got the information from, then it's probably accurate. The authority, is the author listed? Is it from a scholarly source, like, you know, that EDU? Is it from a well-known organization? And so if they're able to put yes on these, then they're, you know, it might be credible. Currency, is the source recent? You know, if it's something that we're trying to research at this time, I don't want something that was done about 100 years ago, right? So it's something that was written then, you know, that it might not apply now. So it needs to be something that is recent. And also objectivity, is the source bias? You know, for the purpose of, you know, for what purpose was this resource created? Is it informational? Is it persuasive? And they can't, it has to be informational. If it's trying to convince you or something, then you know that is something that is not going to apply in the credibility meter. What type of source it is it primary source or secondary source? And one of the things that she always likes to say is that and although not part of the credibility meter, always ask yourself, is this relevant to my topic? You know, when the kids are researching, they found something interesting, and then they go into this little rabbit hole into looking into all these things, and then they just kind of go off into the, you know, the topic, and they're like, okay, is this relevant? Oh no, but I thought it was interesting. So one of the things that because this is something like, for me, primary source, secondary source, like, you know, like, I don't know what those are. You know, you might be more knowledgeable than me in finding credible sources. So I found some videos that, you know, so if you want to teach how to find credible sources and using the credibility meter, there's some YouTube videos in here for you guys to look at, like evaluating sources for credibility, evaluating accuracy and authority, for currency and objectivity. So these are great videos, and they're very short, so you can go ahead and show them to your students. And then they can use this little chart right here, and you can give them, you know, a couple of articles and see if it meets the credibility meter. Yeah, I think I remember, and she has given them something like the history of waffles. And I think, you know, kids think like, oh, because it's about waffles, it's going to be not credible. And then ends up being a credible source, you know. So it meets the credibility meter and it's a credible source. So this is anything, if you're interested in more about, you know, if you want the kids to explore a little more, but you want to make sure that their sources that they're citing are credible, that this is a good good check for them to see that, the credibility meter. I use this, another reason thing to use is like, I give them graphic organizers, and this one is like citing evidence to support claims. So in this one, I want them to read, they could read an article. It is this main idea organizer, and this can be used to gather supporting evidence on an informational or argumentative claim. So it can use for either one of those. So for example, this one, I think, oh yes, I was doing a little activity where they had to read about what the tri-state water wars, and they have to read about, you know, Georgia and Alabama and Florida and how they have been, and how Lake Lanier and the Chattahoochee River and how they've been fighting over the war, especially during the drought and stuff. So I had the kids on their own first read the article, and I gave them different ones. Like one group had the Georgia article, their side of the story. You know, the other one had the Alabama article, the other one had the Florida one. And I just had them, I was like, okay, read this article, tell me what the topic is, or who or what the reading is about. The main idea, which is the main point of the reading, is making about the topic. And then they had to give me some details about that supports the main idea. So the kids did that on their own. And then I had the kids, once I had that information, that they were able, you know, we went over what Georgia and Florida and Alabama thought about, you know, Chattahoochee River and Lake Lanier and what happened. And so then I had them create an argument, and I told them, I said, you are, you know, with that information that you just gather, let's pretend that you are one of the lawyers for the state that they just read, and they had to defend the state. So they had to, then now that they had all their information gathered and they had some evidence, they used this argument organizer, and they put an introduction, right? They gathered all the information that they had for their each state, and they had to give me different reasons and supporting details and evidence and come up with a conclusion. And so the kids, and I said, okay, so I'm the judge, and you're going to have to tell me. They had to have good evidence and, you know, supporting details in order to tell me why they deserve the water, why, you know, whether Georgia needed to keep it or Alabama had to keep it, or, you know, or Florida needed to, you know, also get some of that water that we were lacking at that time. So the kids just went over that, and they gave their conclusions, and they pretended to be the lawyer for that state. And then after, whoever had the best evidence, they're ones who, you know, won the case. So they had fun with that. And so that's, you know, that's one of the ways that I can get them to get citing some evidence, but also, you know, explain things to the audience. All right, so here's another graphic organizer that I have used before. And so this is something that they can use that. So what's their research questions, the evidence, their claim, reasoning, okay? And so for some example tasks that they can use, not, you know, they don't have to be lawyers or anything. They can be writing a letter to an organization and convince them and cite some evidence for that. They can do like an opinion column or blog. They can do like a class debate, kind of like in this case, where they had to stand and say, this is the reason why the state deserves the water. They can do like a billboard educating someone, and usually that has like an opinion on it too. So that's why it's more like an argumentative. Or they can do an infomercial, right? So they can do different ways that they can portray, you know, answer the question with, you know, trying to convince someone, or what in language charts call it, support their stance. That's what it isn't, you know, not convincing, but they said supporting a stance. So I try to remember to say that, though I forget, but because that's what the language that she uses in her class, so I try to use that same thing in there. So those are the other ways that they can do that. So for informational writing, you can also use this for informational writing, you know, and It does not necessarily need to be something that they have to defend. Again, some example tasks for that can be billboards, infographics, storytelling, or informational videos. Remember, when they're doing informational writing, it should teach the audience about the topic. So it's not trying to, inform them, just give them the facts, not opinions or feelings. Okay, so once that you go ahead and give them, once they learn how to do, cite evidence and paraphrase and all the stuff, and and they're used to this, so maybe you want to give them a writing prompt, right? And so you can use any of these writing strategies. It could either be the RACE strategy or the ACE or the I strategy, right? The RACE strategies, they restate the question, they answer the question, they cite evidence, and they explain the evidence. The ACE is just answering the question, cite the evidence, and explain the evidence. And if you wanted to do the ICE, is to introduce your quotation, cite your quotation, and explain your quotation. So they're pretty much all this, the same thing. Is just one of them. They have different acronyms. So, but the one I use in my class is the RACE strategy, and that is because that is what our language arts teachers uses. And so, one of the things that, I give them this before I give them the prompt, and I'll go ahead and she tells them that she does not want them to use first or second pronouns like I, my, you, or your. They cannot use forbidden phrases like I think, I believe, my evidence is, I know this because you can see. So she does not want that. So therefore, when they're writing for me, I need to make sure that they're not doing that either. And I give them this on the writing prompt because that kind of makes me remember too that, oh, they can't use this, and they're not allowed to use more than one quotation. So one of the things that when citing evidence, I usually put in there, like they could put something like, instead of I think or my evidence, I could say according to the blank, and say whatever the resource was. It shows that. And they can give information. The information on the whatever it was they found it informs the reader. So if I give them something like that, then they can go ahead and they can avoid those forbidden phrases or those first and second pronouns. One thing I did learn is that they have to follow the RACE strategy in order. They can't put RCAE, have to actually follow the RACE in order. Okay, so I use her same rubric, so that way they with the organization and style, and that way, since they have used it in language arts class, and they know that this is how they'll be graded, that is this the same format, except instead of answering a question about something in language arts, which I don't know. There's something there, they're defending or gathering evidence for a prompt in science. So let me just review about, because sometimes, and I did have to ask my language arts teachers, like, okay, well, then when did they cite questions? When did they do this? So I found this really helpful to me. The kids cite evidence to support claims. When do we do that? Where do I research credible sources on information or writing and argumentative writing? Yes, you always do. Do I cite evidence? You cite evidence for both of them. Okay, and I always like to give this to the students too, so they know that if they're trying to inform someone, they have to find evidence, and it has to, or if they want to do an argumentative writing, they have to find evidence, and they have to come from credible sources. So, and what the purpose of each one, because sometimes the students get really into the topic and they want to get their opinions, but if I want them to use an informational writing piece, then they needs to be just to inform. Whereas where argumentative writing has to be to take a stance, right? So that means that if they're informing the audience, and informational writing, it's got to be based on facts, no feelings or opinions. It should be teaching an audience about the topic. Now, where can they put their opinions or feelings? That will be in an argumentative writing, but it's still based on facts. Okay, and they can use any of the writing strategies on both of them, for the informational and for the argumentative. So here are some of the resources that you're welcome to look at and how to teach text evidence. How to, there's a lesson plan, a free lesson plan on citing text evidence. So if you wanted to teach your students, and because you want to do that before the language arts teacher does, and so you want to make sure you're doing it correctly, because I want to make sure I'm teaching it correctly too, or something. If that's the lesson there. There's the using text evidence video. There are some resources on the ICE writing strategy and engaging in argument from evidence. So there's different strategies for that as well. So thank you for joining me in this month's webinar. And if you have any questions or need any other additional information, please feel free to contact me and I'll be glad to answer or help you in any way I can. Thank you.